to Strongman Personal Finance. Today, we're going to talk about how you can maximize your personal finances in the military. Alright everybody, welcome back to my channel. My name is Strongman, and today we're going to talk about personal finances in the military. The first thing we're going to talk about is how much you make, both as an enlisted man and as an officer. Your compensation in the military is a little bit more complex than your compensation in the civilian world. First, you have your base salary. That is your taxable salary that you receive from the government. In addition to that, you're going to have your basic allowance for housing, and you're going to have your basic allowance for subsistence, also known as BAS, or more simply, known as your food allowance. Your basic allowance for housing, also known as BAH, is tax exempt, as well as your BAS. So only your base pay is going to be taxed. Your BAH and your BAS are tax-free. Your housing allowance is going to be based on where you live in the country. So if you live in a very expensive area, your housing allowance is going to be higher. If you live in a very poor area that doesn't cost a lot, your housing allowance is going to be lower. Now your food allowance is going to be the same no matter where you live. However, if you just enlisted in the military and you're private, you're probably not going to get the housing allowance and you're probably not going to get the food allowance. You're going to live in the barracks with all your little buddies. New soldiers generally live on the base. Their food is provided for them, and their housing is provided. So the government's not going to pay you those allowances. Those allowances are designed for people that live off the installation. Now, if you're a glorious officer like I was, you're probably going to live off the base. And when you live off the base, you're going to get your housing allowance, and you're going to get your food allowance. So a lot of you young soldiers think that's completely unfair. And in a way, it kind of is. But guess what? That doesn't mean you can go to the local bar to Wild Country and go marry the first girl you see just so you can move out of the barracks. That is a terrible personal finance decision. Do not get married just so you can leave the barracks, for the love of God. Anyway, getting back on track. So you have your base pay, which is your base salary, and it is taxable. It actually goes in your tax return. Then you may have a housing allowance, and you may have a food allowance. In addition to that, if you live in a very high cost of living area, or you live overseas, you might get COLA, also known as Cost of Living Allowance. That is an additional tax-free benefit that is paid to you because you live in a high cost of living area. Now, that's generally not going to be in a lot of places in the United States, but most likely if you're stationed overseas, you're going to get some kind of COLA. And it can get up to $600, $700, $800 depending on where you live a month. And on top of that, if you get deployed to a war zone, you're going to get additional compensation that is tax-free. This is called combat pay, and there's a bunch of different types of pays that I'm not going to get into right now. But you're going to get that, and on top of that, your base salary up to a certain point is going to be tax-free. So you're making way more money overseas when you get deployed. Now, with all that being said, let's dive into the pay charts and see how much enlisted guys make and how much glorious officers make.
Let's start off with base pay. Don't forget, this is taxable. So the numbers you see here, when you actually get paid, they're going to be a little bit less because the government's taking some taxes out, all right? On the left side, I have the enlisted pay scale from E1 to E5. Those are ranks. And then on the right side, I have the officer pay scale, O1 to O5. Those are also ranks. In the military, you're paid based on your rank and your time in service. So you could be one rank for a very long time and still get pay raises every single year or every couple of years. So that allows you to actually stagnate if you're lazy and you just want to stay one rank and get promoted. Not that I recommend that. Now, starting off with the enlisted guys. When you first enlist, you're usually 17 or 18 years old and you start off as an E1. That is the lowest rank in the military. At that time, you're making $1,700 a month minus taxes. Eventually, you make E2, get a little raise there. Then you make E3, E4, etc., etc., etc. And as you can see, you're getting pay raises based on your rank and your time in service. For this E4, he has 3 years in the military, and he makes $2,500 a month. If he had less than 2 years in the military, he'd only make $2,200 a month. Hopefully that makes sense. Moving over to the officers. Officers get paid a lot more money. That's because they have to go to college before they join the military, so they're a little bit older, and they start off in management positions right off the bat. Now, when you first join as an officer, as an O1, you're going to be making $3,200 a month. After about a year and a half, you're going to get promoted to O2, and you're going to get a nice little pay raise there. Then you're going to be an O2 for a couple of years. And during those years, as you hit those time and service marks, you're going to get pay raises. Eventually, you'll pin on O3, and then after 4 years in the military, you're making $5,800 a month, which is a pretty decent salary. Now, there's no right or wrong thing to do. You can enlist or you can become an officer. It's all based on what you want out of the military. I'm not going to go into that right now because that's really not the purpose of this presentation, but just keep in mind that pay is not the only thing that matters in the military. Now let's talk about BAH, also known as your housing allowance. Your housing allowance is based on where you live. So your housing allowance, if you're stationed in Alaska, is going to be different than your housing allowance in Colorado, which will also be different than your housing allowance in Fort Hood, Texas. Now in this example, I have the enlisted rates for Fort Hood, Texas for BAH. Your BAH is tax-free. This money will not show up in your tax return. So the numbers you see on here are the numbers you're going to see in your paycheck if you live off base. If you live on base, you're not going to get BAH. That's why all these privates that live in the barracks try to get married, because they want this sweet, delicious BAH. And they do that by marrying somebody they don't even know, then they get divorced, and yada yada. It's a train wreck. Anyway, back to BAH. Your BAH depends solely on your rank and whether you have dependents or not. For example, if you're an E1 and you're not married, your BAH would be $960 if you lived off base. If you were married or you had a dependent, let's say a child or a parent or whatever, your BAH would be $1,149. So it's only based on your rank and whether you have dependents or not. Same thing for the officer scale. As you can see, officers make more money in BAH. Your basic allowance for subsistence, also known as BAS or your food allowance, does not depend on where you live, and it's also tax-free. So you're not paying taxes on it. It's not going to show up in your tax return. The numbers you see on the screen are what you're going to get in your paycheck. The only caveat is if you're enlisted and you live in the barracks and you have a meal card, you're not going to see this because all of your BAS is technically going to the DFAC. Officers get a flat rate of $256 a month, and enlisted members get $372 a month. Now, I don't know why the rates are different. It's probably just to help the enlisted guys afford more food because they make less, but these are the rates that you have. These rates get updated every single year, and officers are always going to have less BAS than enlisted guys. But at the end of the day, what you need to understand about this is that it's for food, and you don't get it if you live in the barracks.